You don't control the world. You never have. You never will. You don't control the weather, the traffic, the markets, the moods of others, or the way life throws curveballs at you on the day you were finally ready to stand tall. But the Stoics knew something deeper. You don't need to control life to control how you face it. That's the shift. That's the point where you stop playing the victim. Stop writing the script of your life in blame, and start reclaiming the one power no one can ever take from you: your response. Because life is neutral, cold, wild, indifferent. It doesn't bend for your preferences. It doesn't pause for your pain. It doesn't explain itself before it changes everything. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're being invited to grow into something unshakable. And the Stoics, they trained for this. They trained for rain on the day of battle, for betrayal from a trusted friend, for the moment the plan falls apart, and all you're left with is breath and presence and choice. They called it the discipline of perception, seeing clearly, not through the lens of emotion, but through the lens of responsibility. Because how you see a thing shapes how you meet it. If you see it as a curse, you shrink. If you see it as a teacher, you rise. And life? Life is a brutal, brilliant teacher. It teaches through discomfort, through uncertainty, through tests that don't come with warnings or second chances. But the Stoic doesn't complain. He doesn't explain. He doesn't collapse into the language of "why me?" He breathes. He accepts. He acts. Because control isn't about force. It's about focus. You can't control outcomes, but you can control your effort. You can't control others' respect, but you can control your integrity. You can't control how people interpret your silence, but you can control whether you're speaking from ego or from grounded truth. And that distinction between what's yours and what's not, between what's in your control and what's illusion, that's freedom. It's the freedom to walk into the fire without flinching, to sit in the chaos without needing to fix it immediately, to breathe through disappointment without rewriting your entire self-worth. Because you're no longer measuring peace by how well the world behaves. You're measuring peace by how well you remain anchored when it doesn't. That's what Stoic control means. It's not emotional repression. It's emotional precision. It's saying, I feel this, fully, clearly, but I don't act from it blindly. It's saying, I see the problem, but I won't become it. It's saying, I can't control what happened, but I will control what happens next. And that control, that inner grip, that calm in the center of the storm, that's what makes you powerful. Not the ability to manipulate the external, but the ability to master the internal. That's what the Stoics lived for. Not a quiet life, but a steady soul. Not comfort, but clarity. Not the absence of adversity, but the ability to remain unchanged by it. Because once you understand this, that the world doesn't owe you stability, and still, you can become it. You stop chasing control. And you start embodying it, not with clenched fists, but with open hands, with an open heart, with a clear mind that says, this is mine to carry. The rest, I let go. That's real control, not domination, not escape, just presence, just ownership. Just peace that doesn't depend on anything but your own disciplined awareness. And once you start living that way, you'll realize you don't need to control the world. You just need to stop letting it control you. You feel it rise in your chest. Heat, tension, that tightness in the throat, the pressure behind your eyes, anger, fear, resentment, sadness. It shows up uninvited, quick, sharp, loud. And most people, they let it drive. They hand the wheel to emotion. They let the heat of a moment set fire to things they'll later wish they had protected. They mistake emotion for instruction. But emotion is not a command. It's feedback. That's the Stoic view. You don't suppress your emotions. You study them, you sit with them like teachers. Not tyrants, not dictators, because every emotion has a message. But that message doesn't always mean you should act. Feel it? Yes. Understand it? Always. Obey it? Not necessarily. That's where most fall. They think, I'm angry, so I must lash out. I'm afraid, so I must retreat. I'm sad, so I must collapse. But Stoicism says, pause, breathe, watch, let the emotion pass through, let it speak, but don't hand it the microphone. Because emotion is data, not destiny. It's not the enemy, it's the alert. And what you do after the alert is where your power lives. Do you react, or do you reflect? Do you explode, or do you inquire? Because every emotion is a signal, not a sentence. Anger tells you something feels violated. Fear tells you you're in unknown territory. Jealousy tells you there's something you haven't owned in yourself. Resentment tells you you've been silent too long, but none of that means you act from that place. You act through it, after it, beyond it. You allow emotion to inform you, not transform you into something you're not. Because if you let your emotions rule you, you will become a slave to the temporary. You will say things you can't unsay, do things you can't undo. Burn bridges you'll one day wish you had crossed with patience. That's why the Stoics trained for emotional discipline like warriors, not because they feared emotion, but because they feared what it could cost if left unexamined. They didn't seek to feel nothing. They sought to feel fully or no, without being ruled, because a man who can feel deeply but choose wisely is unshakable. He's not robotic. He's anchored. He feels the same fear, but walks anyway. He feels the same anger, but speaks with precision. He feels the same grief, but moves with grace. That's Stoic maturity, not numbness but mastery. And mastery is not the absence of feeling. It's the presence of choice in the face of it. It's saying, this is here. I see it. I feel it. And I will decide what comes next. Not the emotion. Because emotion, left unchecked, will have you reacting to life instead of responding to it. It will have you trapped in cycles, in regrets, in impulsive moves that feel good now and cost you later. But when you pause, when you watch it rise, watch it peak, watch it pass like a wave, you become something rare. You become someone who doesn't need to be calmed from the outside, because he knows how to steady from within. That's power, that's peace, that's presence. So the next time emotion surges, don't silence it, study it, honor it. But remember, it's just feedback. It's not the captain. You are. Something happens. An insult, an inconvenience, a delay, a raised voice, a missed opportunity, and before your mind even catches up, you've already reacted, snapped, withdrawn, explained, defended, lashed out, shut down, because that's what reaction is: automatic, unfiltered, rooted in survival, not sovereignty. But the Stoic doesn't live in reaction. He lives in response. That's the distinction. That's the gap. And that gap between what happens and what you do next is where your power lives. The reactive man gives that power away to emotions, to impulses, to other people's energy. He lets the world pull his strings. He thinks he's acting, but he's just echoing noise. The Stoic man, he creates space. He pauses. He watches the moment unfold without becoming it. He asks, "Is this worth my energy? Does this align with my character? Is my reaction serving the person I want to be, or just protecting the person I've been?" That space isn't weakness, it's strength, because anyone can react. But to respond, intentionally, calmly, cleanly, requires mastery. Mastery of emotion, of thought, of presence. The reactive mind is fast, but it's often wrong. It speaks from fear, from ego, from memory. But the responsive mind, it speaks from truth, from clarity, from now. And that clarity can't be reached in a rush. It lives in the pause, in the breath, in the decision not to be moved by every wave that passes through you. The Stoics practiced this daily. They knew the world would provoke them. People would test them. Life would disappoint them. But their dignity was not up for negotiation. Their response was theirs to shape. And that shaping was the true work. It meant choosing words instead of noise. It meant choosing stillness instead of speed. It meant choosing awareness instead of assumption, because not every situation requires a reaction. Not every moment asks for your voice. Not every offense is worth your energy. That's not passivity. That's precision, because reaction is blunt, but response is surgical. Reaction explodes, response lands, and your life is a reflection of which one you practice more. So ask yourself, in the last conflict, did I react? Or did I respond? In the last uncomfortable moment, did I collapse into old patterns, or pause and choose new ones? Because the man who reacts is a slave to what happens, but the man who responds becomes a shaper of what happens next. And that shaping, it changes everything. It changes how people experience you, how you experience yourself, how you're nervous. System learns that peace is not found in control, but in choice. And that choice is always available, in every moment, in every breath, in every storm. So the next time the moment rises and you feel the wave come, don't run from it. Don't obey it. Watch it. And then decide, not how do I feel, but who do I want to be in this moment? Because reaction is the old self surviving. Response is the new self arriving. And once you learn to live in response, you're no longer just in the world, you're shaping it. Most people run from discomfort. They treat it like a virus, like failure, like something to be numbed, avoided, negotiated with. They search for ease. They design their days for comfort. They build routines that avoid pressure. And yet, they still feel weak, still feel hollow, still feel like something is missing because comfort doesn't create growth. Discomfort does, and the Stoics knew it. They didn't seek pain, but they never feared it, because to them, pain wasn't punishment. It was instruction, a signal, a sharpening, a sacred doorway into the parts of yourself that you would never meet inside a padded life. You grow when you stop flinching from the uncomfortable. You rise when you stop interpreting pain as a problem. You become when you stop assuming every difficult moment means you're doing something wrong. The Stoics trained their mind for this, to sit in cold, to face rejection, to feel failure, not just intellectually, but physically, emotionally, viscerally, and not shrink. Because discomfort reveals the truth about what you fear, about what you cling to, about where you've avoided your own becoming. Every challenge you face is a mirror. It shows you what you're made of, not when things are going right, but when nothing goes to plan, when the path disappears, when life doesn't ask for your permission before it changes everything. That's the Stoic way To face that moment without begging for it to be different. To breathe in the fire and say, there is something here for me. Not because you're addicted to hardship, but because you understand. Discomfort is feedback from your edge. And your edge is where your next level lives. It's not in the easy. It's not in the echo chamber. It's not in safety. It's in the stretch.
In the unknown. In the awkward, vulnerable, humbling moments where you're not sure who you are anymore, but you choose to stand anyway. That choice is where identity is forged, and the more you train yourself to stay in discomfort, without
collapsing, without escaping, without numbing, the more unstoppable you become. Because now, you're no longer reactive to pain. You're relational to it. You see it. You hear it. You ask what it's teaching, instead of what it's ruining. That's emotional maturity. That's Stoic resilience. And that's how peace is earned. Not through avoidance but through absorption. Not by dodging life, but by digesting it. Feeling everything, but not letting it own you. Seeing everything, but not letting it blind you. Discomfort doesn't break you. Running from it does. But if you can sit through it just long enough to hear what it came to teach, you become something more than strong. You become still in motion, still in pain, still. When the world screams for a reaction, and from that stillness you begin to build a life not based on ease, but on excellence. Because excellence is built in the place where comfort ends. So stop asking for it to be easier. Ask to become wider, deeper, more resilient. Stop asking for the test to end. Ask to meet the version of you that only pressure can awaken. That's what discomfort brings. Not destruction, but discovery. The only question is, will you keep running, or will you finally sit long enough to learn? Most people misunderstand control. They think it means domination over others, over time, over chaos. But the Stoics knew true control doesn't happen out there. It happens in here, and it starts with you. Not with willpower, not with white-knuckling your way through pain, but with one simple truth. Self-control is self-respect. That's it. That's the lesson. You don't hold back because you're weak. You hold back because you honor yourself. You don't say no to that impulse because you hate pleasure. You say no because you know where that road leads, and you respect yourself too much to walk it again. You don't shut your mouth in the heat of an argument because you're afraid, Manar. You do it because you value your peace more than proving your point. That's what self-control is. It's not suppression. It's sovereignty. It's the art of deciding what deserves your reaction, your energy, your voice, and what doesn't. And the Stoic lives there, in that space between stimulus and response, in that breath before the fire, in that moment when the ego says, strike, and the soul whispers, hold. Because every time you choose discipline over impulse, you vote for your higher self. You reaffirm your vision. You practice identity. And that identity is built in silence. When you want to snap, but breathe instead. When you want to give up, but stand anyway. When you want to indulge, but choose restraint. That's not about rules. That's about reverence. For who you're becoming. For the future you're protecting. For the quiet integrity that doesn't need praise to be real. Self-control isn't loud. It doesn't perform. It doesn't post. It just shows up. Every time you walk away from something that isn't aligned. Every time you delete the message you know came from ego. Every time you choose discipline when no one would blame you for choosing comfort. That's control. And control is freedom. Because when you master yourself, you stop being manipulated by the world. You stop being tossed by emotion. You stop living at the mercy of impulse. You become calm, not because the world is quiet, but because you are. And that calm, it's magnetic. It speaks without volume. It radiates without needing to prove. It says, I know who I am, and I will not abandon that for a moment of weakness. This is why the Stoics practice constraint, not to be better than anyone, but to stay loyal to themselves, to stay true when anger called for chaos, when pleasure called for escape, when fear called for retreat. They stood still, unshaken, because they knew every act of self-control was an act of self-respect, and a life built on that is unbreakable. There's a moment, quiet but defining, when you realize convincing people is a trap, convincing them to see you, convincing them to respect you, convincing them to believe what you believe, feel what you feel, honor what you honor. But the Stoics never lived to convince, they lived to embody. Because if you have to argue your worth, and you've already lost it. If you have to defend your truth, you're speaking to the wrong ears. And if you have to explain your peace, you're already giving it away. So stop debating, stop begging, stop rehearsing speeches in your mind that you know won't land. Don't argue, live it. Let your discipline speak. Let your boundaries echo. Let your presence say everything your mouth used to try to explain. That's what the Stoics did. They didn't yell. They didn't plead. They didn't post. They simply lived. Sharply, quietly, aligned. And alignment is louder than any argument, because people will challenge your voice. But they can't unsee your walk. They'll ignore your advice, but they'll remember your example. They'll doubt your message, but they'll feel your presence. That presence comes from not needing to defend yourself every time you're misunderstood, not needing to clap back every time you're disrespected, not needing to be right, only to be real. That's what makes your power clean. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not trying to win. It's unavailable to energy that doesn't match your values. You don't meet pettiness with proof. You don't meet ego with more ego. You don't meet noise with more noise. You meet it all with stillness. Not because you're passive, but because you've already chosen your side. The side of self-ownership. Because when you live it, you don't need to say much. Your posture speaks, your habits speak, your silence speaks. And those who can't hear you there were never meant to walk with you anyway. This is the freedom the Stoics lived for. Not freedom from conflict, but freedom from the need to control other people's perception. They let their actions lead, their example teach, their stillness absorb what lesser minds would fight against. And from that posture they built lives of weight, not noise, of depth, not decoration, of presence, not persuasion. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, to defend, to be understood, pause, breathe, and ask, do I want to win this moment, or do I want to live my principles? Because a moment of validation won't build the life you want, but a life of alignment will validate itself. So walk it. Quietly, firmly, daily, and let that walk do what your words never could. In every moment you are faced with a choice. Do I react or do I restrain? Do I move from instinct nor from intention? Most people don't choose. They react, they lash out. They respond from the rawness of emotion, the heat of ego, the pull of desire. And it feels powerful for a second. But like fire with no form, it burns everything, even the parts worth keeping. That's the lie of indulgence. It promises freedom, but delivers chaos. The Stoics saw this. They saw that the most powerful man is not the one who can conquer others, but the one who can conquer himself. Because the hardest battle is not with the world. It's with your own urge, the urge to prove, to strike, to defend, to dominate, to indulge. But here's the truth, most never learn. Restraint is not weakness. Restraint is victory in silence, it's invisible strength. It's walking away without needing the last word. It's sitting still when your ego screams to stand, it's choosing peace. Not because you're afraid to fight, but because you know what fighting costs. You don't restrain because you're fragile. You restrain because you're clear. Clear about your values. Clear about your vision. Clear about who you are and who you refuse to become again. That's what restraint protects. Your future, because every time you give in to impulse, you steal from the man you're becoming. But every time you hold, even when it's hard, even when it burns, you invest. In strength, in identity, in alignment. The Stoics understood this discipline, not just in philosophy but in practice. They trained their responses. They trained their silence. They trained their delay between stimulus and action, because they knew impulse is loud, but clarity is quiet, and that quiet is where your real power lives. So the next time you want to strike, pause. The next time you want to explain, breathe. The next time you want to indulge and ask, does this serve who I'm building or who I used to be? Because most of the battles you think are urgent are really invitations. Invitations to become something better, to rise above noise, to answer without lowering your voice or your standard. Restraint doesn't mean you ignore your feelings. It means you own them. You feel the fire, but you don't throw it. You hear the insult, but you don't echo it. You sense the temptation, but you don't feed it, because you've tasted what impulse brings. And you've decided you're done trading your peace for a 5-second victory. This is the real reward, not what the world gives you for restraint, but what you give yourself. Self-trust, self-respect, a reputation built in the dark, in the unseen moments where you chose discipline over drama. Those moments, they don't get applause, but they build something stronger than praise. They build character. The kind of character that doesn't need validation to stand firm. The kind that doesn't seek to be understood, because it understands itself. And that's the man who moves through the world with unshakable weight. Not because he's emotionless, but because he's anchored. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he knows that feeling isn't always the same as truth. So he listens, but he doesn't obey. He breathes, but he doesn't break. He chooses. And in that choice he wins. Not the argument, not the moment, but the war within. That's Stoicism. That's the reward. Not comfort, not applause, but quiet, unshakable respect from yourself. Because the man who can hold when everything inside him wants to release is already free. There are things you can buy back: time, health, opportunities, but peace. Once you lose it, once you trade it little by little for validation, attention, noise, performance, you wake up one day surrounded by everything except yourself, and that's when the Stoics step in. Not with panic, not with judgment, but with one brutal question. Was it worth your peace? Was the argument worth it? Was the approval worth it? Was the need to be right, seen, loud, worth the silence you gave up inside? Because here's the Stoic truth. If it costs you peace, it's too expensive. It doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside. If it leaves your soul cluttered, it's not success. Peace isn't passive. It's not lazy. It's not the absence of struggle. It's the presence of clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what deserves your energy. Clarity about what gets access and what doesn't. And the more you protect that peace, the more powerful you become. Because peace sharpens you. It makes your yes clean. It makes your no immovable. It makes your movement sacred, not frantic. But peace can't coexist with everything. It doesn't thrive in chaos. It doesn't bloom in reactivity. It doesn't speak in rooms where everyone's yelling. So the Stoic simplifies. Not because life is simple, but because clarity requires subtraction. You don't find peace by adding more. You find it by removing what pulls you out of alignment. The constant checking, the endless proving, the running commentary in your head that keeps score of every insult, every injustice, every moment they didn't see you. That noise, it's not just distracting, it's draining. And if you let it, you'll give your whole life to things that can't even remember your name 5 minutes later. So ask yourself, what are you holding on to that's too expensive? Is it a title? A toxic friendship? A reputation you're scared to outgrow? Whatever it is, if it costs you sleep, your breath, your stillness, your sense of self, it's not a blessing. It's a bill you'll keep paying with your nervous system, and no amount of external reward is worth. Internal confusion, because peace is the only currency that holds value everywhere you go. In leadership, in love, in legacy. It's what lets you walk into any room and not need to own it, because you already own yourself. That's why the Stoics didn't chase. They didn't argue. They didn't obsess over how they were perceived. They chose stillness. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew energy is sacred. And peace is proof that you've learned how to guard it. So when something challenges you, before you engage, ask, will this cost me peace? If the answer is yes, you already know what to do. Because peace isn't just something you have. It's something you choose. Over and over. Especially when chaos offers you louder prizes. You don't have to accept every invitation to defend yourself. You don't have to answer every call to urgency. You don't have to explain silence to people who only hear noise. You just have to decide, this peace I've built is not up for negotiation. The mind speaks, endlessly, loudly, randomly. It reminds you of who you were, who you should have been, what you should fear, what you should say next, what you must avoid, what you must chase. And if you're not trained, you'll believe it. You'll believe that every thought is truth, that every narrative is fact, that your mind is a mirror instead of what it really is, a tool, a messenger, a filter, not your identity. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that thoughts come and go, like weather, like wind, like waves on the surface of the sea. And if you mistake the wave for the ocean, you forget who you are. So they taught, you are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them. That distance is where power begins. Because when you create space between what you think and what you believe, you begin to live with clarity. You no longer react to every mental storm. You no longer attach to every passing fear. You no longer confuse your inner critic for your inner compass. Instead, you ask, who is thinking this? Is this mine, or a voice I picked up somewhere? Does this serve me, or just scare me? And just like that, you reclaim the throne inside your own head. Because if you don't question your thoughts, they will control you. They will define you. They will trap you in identities that you never consciously chose. The Stoics knew this. That's why they practiced daily self-inquiry, not just journaling for peace, but for precision, because they didn't trust every thought. They tested them. They interrogated them. They held them up to the light and asked, is this worthy of my mind? Because your mind is sacred ground. It's where decisions are born, where values are tested, where your whole life begins. before it ever touches the outside world. And if you let unfiltered, unconscious, reactive thoughts run that world, you're not living. You're echoing. You're repeating the fears of your parents, the doubts of your past, the assumptions of a culture that benefits from your confusion. But the moment you stop, the moment you pause and observe without judgment, you create space. And in that space, you can choose again. You can rewrite, reframe, rebuild the scaffolding of your inner world based on clarity, not clutter. And that's what freedom feels like. Not silence of thought, but sovereignty within thought. You don't need to eliminate every negative voice. You just need to stop obeying them. You don't need to force positivity. You just need to anchor in truth. Because thought is only powerful when you give it your belief. And belief should be earned. So the next time your mind tells you you're not ready, but ask, says who? The next time it tells you you're falling behind, ask, by what measure? The next time it says you're not enough, ask, compared to what? To whom? To which version of myself? This is what Stoicism gives you. Not a quieter mind, but a stronger self. A self that stands tall in the middle of mental noise and says, I hear you, but I decide what's true. Because you are not your thoughts. You are the thinker. And when the thinker is awake, the thoughts lose their grip. That's the difference, that's the work, that's the principle. We all want results. Better days, stronger peace, deeper focus. A life that feels aligned, not scattered. But results don't start with vision. They start with something far simpler and far more demanding. Your standards. The invisible lines you draw, the boundaries you enforce, the minimums you allow, the maximums you tolerate. The Stoics didn't talk about dreams, they talked about virtue, because they knew you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your standards. And most people, they keep falling. Not because they're not talented, not because they lack time, but because their standards are shaped by comfort, not by character. They tolerate chaos. They explain disrespect. They adjust to environments that insult their values. And they tell themselves, it's just temporary, I'll fix it when things calm down. But here's the Stoic truth: what you tolerate becomes your template, and what you allow repeats. So if your life feels off, if your days feel disjointed, if your energy is diluted, you don't need a new strategy. You need a new standard, a new baseline, a new floor beneath your values that says, I don't dip below this anymore. Not for anyone, not for anything, not even for me on a bad day. That floor, it's sacred, because everything you build rests on top of it. Your discipline, your focus, your relationships, your ability to say no without guilt and yes without regret. And the moment you raise that floor, your life begins to rise with it. Because standards aren't rules, they're reflections of how much you respect yourself, of how clearly you've defined who you are, of how unwilling you are to betray your future just to feel comfortable in the present. The Stoics lived this. They didn't wake up and hope to be strong. They trained for it with what they read, what they refused, what they repeated, because they knew. Every choice you make is a reflection of what you truly believe you deserve. So ask yourself, what are you allowing that's no longer aligned? What patterns have you normalized that your highest self would never tolerate? Where have you dropped your floors and called it realistic because your destiny doesn't unfold by accident? It's shaped by the lines you refuse to cross and the lines you refuse to let others cross either. So raise them, quietly, deliberately, without warning the world. Raise the way you speak to yourself. Raise the energy you accept in conversation. Raise the people you allow to sit at your table. Raise the clarity in your morning. Raise the tone of your boundaries. Because the moment you do, everything that doesn't match that frequency will fall away. Not because you fought it, but because it no longer belongs, and what remains is cleaner, sharper, truer, because your standard is no longer comfort, it's character. And when you build on that, you don't chase destiny, you live into it. We live in a world obsessed with appearances, with performance, with aesthetics, with how things look. People train their bodies, hours in the gym, tracking every calorie, perfecting angles in the mirror for praise that lasts 5 seconds and fades even faster. But the Stoics? They weren't sculpting muscle. They were forging mind because they knew your body carries you, but your mind creates you. And if your mind is weak, it doesn't matter how strong your body looks. You'll fold under pressure, collapse under judgment, run from discomfort, chase noise just to feel significant. That's not strength. That's decoration. True strength is invisible. It lives in your thinking, in your ability to choose stillness over chaos, silence over noise, discipline over impulse, and that kind of strength is trained like anything else. So ask yourself, when was the last time you trained your mind with the same intensity that you trained your body? When was the last time you chose to sit in discomfort without reacting? Noticed a toxic thought and challenged it, not obeyed it? Endured boredom without reaching for a screen? Chose long-term integrity over short-term validation? Because these are the mental push-ups, the inner squats, the reps of self-mastery that don't get posted, but they shape everything. The Stoics lived for this. Not because they rejected the body, but because they respected the mind. They knew that if the mind was undisciplined, no amount of external strength could protect you, because a weak mind will sabotage a strong body. It will chase distraction. It will crumble under insult. It will turn silence into anxiety and solitude into suffering. But a trained mind? That's a fortress. It's calm under attack, still in noise, focused in temptation, unmoved by praise, by criticism, by chaos. It doesn't panic, it prepares, it doesn't collapse, it calculates. It doesn't need the world to be fair because it's ready for the opposite. So how do you train it? You train it by doing what's uncomfortable, by reading when you want to scroll, by reflecting when you want to react, by asking hard questions, and sitting with the answers that don't flatter your ego. You train it by creating space between what you feel and what you do, by studying the moment instead of escaping it. You train it by keeping promises to yourself when no one is watching, by waking up when it's cold, by choosing restraint when it burns, by speaking only when you're anchored. And over time, the world will feel less heavy, not because it changed, but because you did. You will move quieter, decide faster, need less, and people will feel it. They won't know what shifted, but they'll know they can't shake you. That's the reward. Not applause, not popularity, but internal immovability. Because when your mind is strong, really strong, you stop chasing safety. You become it. So yes, train your body, respect it, use it, but never forget, it is the mind that tells the body when to stand, when to rest, and when to rise again. There's a kind of life that feels like quicksand, every decision reactive, every response pressured, every move made not from clarity, but from fear of falling behind. fear of being misunderstood, fear of not doing enough. You're not moving forward. You're just trying not to drown. And most people call that ambition. They call it the grind. They call it success. But the Stoics would call it something else. Disorder. Not disorder of the world, but of the self. Because when you live by pressure, you are shaped by everything but your own soul. You become who they expect, who they reward, who they find useful, who they say is worthy, and piece by piece you abandon your principles in the name of approval, of pace, of survival. But the Stoic, he chooses a different way. He lives by principle, not because it's easy, but because it's clear. Principle doesn't change with mood, it doesn't shift with culture, it doesn't break under pressure. It holds. It anchors you when the world demands movement. It reminds you who you are when everyone else wants you to forget. It tells you, speak the truth, even when silence is more profitable. Say no, even when yes is more comfortable. Hold the line, even when retreat would be applauded. Honor your values, even when no one is looking. That's the life of a Stoic, not robotic, not rigid, but deeply, fiercely aligned. Because when you live by principle, you stop negotiating your identity. You stop editing your soul to fit the context. You become steady, predictable, not in weakness but in virtue. People may not agree with you. They may not understand you, but they'll know one thing. You are not moved by noise, by pressure, by trend. You are moved by something older, something deeper, by the decision you made to build your life from the inside out. So pause now and ask yourself, what pressures are shaping me? Whose expectations have become my instructions? Where have I compromised clarity for comfort? And more importantly, what principles have I abandoned? And am I willing to return to them? Because the world will keep pushing, harder, louder, faster. It will reward those who comply, punish those who pause, mock those who walk away. But if you want peace that lasts, clarity that endures, integrity that echoes beyond this season, you have to choose something stronger than pressure. You have to choose principle, and not just in the big moments, but in the daily ones. When you choose silence over gossip, discipline over impulse, presence over performance, truth over approval. Those choices, they build the life brick by brick, breath by breath, standard by standard, until one day, you realize you don't need to prove anything. You just need to remain centered. You don't need to keep up. You just need to keep true. And that truth, that is your freedom. Because you were not born to be swayed. You were born to stand, not above others, but deeply within yourself. So stand quietly, stand firmly, stand in your principles, and let the pressure pass like wind. You are not the storm. You are the stone it breaks against.